welcome to Business Talk, brought to you by the Sharonville Chamber of Commerce. I'm Brent Scares with Emory Federal Credit Union. I'm your host, and today here in studio we have Karl Ulrich with Sebaly, Shillito and Dyer, and Pandy Pridemore from The Human Resource USA, here to talk to us about corrective actions and disciplinary actions and what the difference is and when we should do them and what we need to make sure we're not doing to get us in trouble, right?
Right.
Karl, Pandy, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm laughing because this topic is probably the #1 most avoided topic for small businesses.
Yet, so businesses do not like to have to confront employees about, hey, I don't like how you're doing this, or...
I love the fact that he pulled the word confront.
Confront is an important word, yes.
As passionate and as bold and as the cowboy spirit in most entrepreneurs, it's amazing how many passive-aggressive or non-confrontational entrepreneurs we run into, and what a disadvantage. I mean, they just back themselves into corners when they start showing those traits in dealing with their employees.
So do they typically just like let it fester and fester until they just explode, Karl?
I think it's a little bit of avoidance. Yeah, I think sometimes you get into that mode where you want to put it off until it becomes so much of a problem that it becomes too much of a problem to deal with in the ordinary course. And I do think there's a little bit of avoidance going on with a lot of business owners.
So should they correct, in private, in public, in front of other employees? What do you think? Well,
probably not in public.
I just say that because I have seen some.
Yeah, no,
I've seen some that just yell at people.
Yeah, yeah.
And what does that accomplish?
Yep.
What does that accomplish?
Yeah.
And the reason they're doing that is because they've let it go so long and it's festered that now they snap.
Yeah. Now they're just angry. They don't even have any tact in how they're going to approach, the situation.
And what does that accomplish?
I think getting into the right frame of mind for a conversation with an employee about how they're not performing well, or how they violated a rule, or how they're in some way not meeting the standards you set for them. Getting into that right frame of mind is the first step, and it's not about anger. It's not about penalizing someone necessarily. It's first and foremost, it's a business conversation between one business person and an employee or another business person. It's got to be approached from that standpoint. And because
in private, right?
And in private, you have a private conversation. Now, that doesn't mean you do it all by yourself if you're the supervisors.
No.
I think you want to have somebody there listening who's either taking notes or just listening to the conversation as an observer. Sure.
Witnessing,
Witnessing,
that you actually have had this conversation.
Yeah.
Because if you were to terminate someone, and you're saying, I'm terminating you for this, I've had this many conversations with you about it, and they say, well, no, you haven't. It's your word against
exactly
theirs, and if you've had I don't know, an executive assistant or a manager or some, what do you do if it's a small business and you're the boss and there are no other managers?
You can always find someone. That's the last thing you want to do is have a male versus a female, or a female versus a male, which can be just as dangerous. There's so many scenarios that you don't want to get into, so you can always find someone.
Bring in someone.
And let's kind of break this down a little bit, because there is a big difference between disciplinary and corrective.
Okay.
Right, and I think a corrective action discussion is a very different conversation than somebody who's being disciplined for a particular rules violation. I mean, a corrective, I think for the most part, most of the conversations we have in this area with employees tend to be corrective action. They tend to be designed to get the performance back to a point where they're meeting expectations, to fix the problem. That really ought to be goal number one. Now, not every time that's possible, and so then you have a disciplinary conversation where the end result is some kind of penalty. But for the most part, it has to be, you start out with presumption that you're going to try to fix it if
Yeah.
if it's fixable at all.
So, you pull them aside, hey, in order for us to be successful, I really need you to communicate with the customer in
Right.
this manner. And, or I need you, if it's a clothing issue, if it's improper attire that they continue to wear or something
Just have
like
to go
that.
back to those white
I
shorts.
know. Pandy,
You are
get that in there.
so
Fit that in there.
dependable.
Business
So
talk theme,
dependable.
yeah.
Yes.
So just because you can wear certain things doesn't mean you should, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
so-
So several corrective actions or corrective conversations, crucial conversations should take place prior to the discipline. But boy, if it's a safety issue,
yeah.
I mean, if it's to the point where no more talking or we can't wait to talk, absolutely jump forward. So let's also talk about, you know how I am about the handbook and people putting
Yeah.
stuff in writing. I was just with a client the other day and they had probably 20 different infractions and where they were going to start in the discipline or the corrective action process. And that is just so dangerous because once it's in writing, you have to follow that. I mean, if you put in your handbook that if you do this, then we're going to start here and you're going to get 3 opportunities, you can't break that. So you have to be really careful what you put in your handbook and giving the business owner a little bit of discretion and doing more of the working with each other. I like one-on-ones.
Right. I mean, I would pick up on what Pandy said. I think I've become more and more over time a proponent, less a proponent of this progressive discipline notion where you go through a series of steps to ultimate termination, and more of a proponent of what I'd call a proportional discipline process, where you say to the employee, the discipline is going to match the severity of the infraction, or you're going to take into account past history, the severity of the infraction, and other factors. And so it isn't necessarily about going steps 1, 2, and 3 in a particular order, but finding the right match. And that gives I think that gives the supervisor, gives management a little more flexibility to address a problem. It also doesn't lock you in. If you get to a point where you've got a severe infraction and you haven't disciplined that individual before, but it's something severe enough where you just simply have to let them go, you don't carry the risk of not having gone through prior steps. You have a little bit more cover to go straight to the appropriate sanction.
Now, Pandy, couldn't you have that also in your handbook as this is an immediate termination kind of an event? This particular thing would be cause for immediate termination, not just
absolutely. Harassment, bullying, safety issues again. One particular situation was this young man who just refused to stop throwing ice into the French fryer machine. Can we all guess what happens there? And fortunately, they had, tried to explain to him 2 occasions. 3rd occasion, he gets burnt. They terminate him. Okay, so there are situations where you really have to draw the line. And so let's go back to that. So what do you do when you have that original conversation? Well, they were documenting it. Now, even if you're just considering it a verbal conversation, document it. I tell people, even if you're putting it on your date book, even if you're saying, I spoke to him on this date about this, it doesn't have to be elaborate. And no, we don't always have to have.
It doesn't have to be a formal reprimand.
It doesn't always have to
write-up.
be. You're acknowledging and you're recognizing something that needs to change, something that we want to modify. And they don't have to sign that part.
Okay.
But we're going to use that as a springboard to build a story to the point of either they change or we
now
have
that
to
would be
go further.
corrective, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but documentation is huge because if you're going to go to a Karl, if I'm going to put something in Karl's lap, he's going to first look at me and go, okay, well, what documentation do we have? Did I put words in your mouth?
No, you didn't. I was about to say that. And
So when you get there and there's no documentation, that puts you in a bind, doesn't it?
Well, it does, and it becomes from a legal defense standpoint, becomes a question of one person's word against the other. Documentation breaks the tie. It helps render one version of events more credible than the other. It's that additional piece of evidence that really, from a litigation standpoint, makes all the difference. And how you create that document matters as well. I think a lot of times the same mistakes people make in those meetings are made in creating the documents. They may be venting or they may be expressing anger in a meeting, and then that somehow is shown in the way they write up the documentation. Again, it has to be dispassionate. It has to be completely objective, and you pull out all the emotion, all all the anger, all whatever natural human reactions you'd have to be pulled out of that, and it has to just be about the facts and support the ultimate decision you're making.
So you don't make comments like on there that all the young people do this these days, or this guy, gosh, he's so old and out of touch, he doesn't even know. You don't put stuff like that.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
But you have no idea.
I'm sure Pandy has seen this, and I know I have quite a few documents like that. So.
Yeah.
Stay on documentation, but one of the things that, and Karl, you and I haven't really talked about this, but one of the things that I love to see in a corrective action, some kind of document for it, is I like to see the employee's rebuttal. I like to see their comments, because I want to know, am I giving you the resources to be successful? Have I properly trained you? Have I given you enough time to accomplish this task? Are you doing other things that I don't know about that are pulling you away from concentrating or spending time on this particular issue? So I literally tell my clients, look, add a little section on there, or give the employee the opportunity. Is there something that you need to share with us, any comments you want to make, even if you flip the form over and have them sign the back? Which is another thing that we need to talk about, because one of the biggest complaints that I get from clients is, well, they refuse to sign it. I put it down in front of them and they refuse to sign it. If someone gave you a corrective action, would you, or a disciplinary action, would you automatically just sign it because your employer told you to?
Not necessarily. If I didn't agree with it, I would have a tough time signing it.
Exactly. Exactly.
So what do you do? What's the legal situation there?
I mean, my response to that is, you're signing the document to show that we've presented it to you, not that you necessarily agree. We're not asking you to agree or disagree.
Signing it under protest?
You can, and at
they can write that.
And at the end of the day, they can sign it or not sign it. If they refuse to sign it, I think it's just important for the supervisor or the manager to write on their signature line that, presented but refused to sign. In other words, there's some notation on the document indicating that it was presented, because that's really, at the end of the day, all we're after. We want to make sure that it's clear from the record that the narrative, the document, shows that it's been presented and discussed.
Yeah.
And remember, you've got that witness sitting there, so you can have them sign saying it was presented, so you've got a second pair of eyes.
Yeah.
Again, that's another reason why I like the rebuttal part, because if they're going to sit down and go, oh, okay, you want my side of the story, I won't sign that, but I'll sign this, and acknowledge the conversation in their rebuttal.
Right.
So Karl can automatically say, well, how could you have written this rebuttal if you hadn't been in this conversation? Right. So there are other tricks where you can say, well, okay, well then here, I'll flip it over and you can sign saying you refuse to sign. Well, most people have kind of read through that little trick. So it's just one of those deals. But probably the biggest message we need to send out is not to avoid these conversations and have them timely. And again, when you take the emotion out and you stay focused, there's a great book, Crucial Conversations, that teaches individuals and business owners how to do that, how to stay focused on the principle of the conversation and then the outcome. Stay focused on where you want to be after all this. And it goes a little easier.
Yeah.
Far more productive.
Parting thoughts, Karl?
I was going to say, I think a good conversation like this starts with what are the standards, the expectations that were not met? How did you not meet them? And some specific examples. And then the third final piece of that is, what are the outcomes that we expect, to Pandy's point? What are the things we need you to do to fix? What are the expectations going forward? And that's basically the conversation. And then, of course, you document that.
And I would also put a time frame to follow back up.
Right.
Don't let that die. Don't have this emotional or this confrontation and then not come back in 4 weeks and applaud them for correcting it or acknowledging that we need to have another.
Acknowledge that you've seen the change.
Just acknowledge something.
Yeah.
And let the individual know that it was a serious matter.
Great point. Well, Pandy, Karl, thank you so much for being here. And,
it's always fun.
And talking to us about this. I think this is something that everyone deals with on a day-to-day basis, and I think this is great advice. Great advice. You've been watching Business Talk, brought to you by the Sharonville Chamber of Commerce. Till next time, we'll see you right here on Business Talk.